I'm going to talk about it. We're going to talk about Bruno. I just got finished watching a channel called Nerd Immersion, and this gentleman does a hot take on all things Dungeons and Dragons and RPGs in general. Um, the conversation that he had this morning is more about the Open Gaming License (OGL), which has been more or less a source of creative outlets, uh, a way for third-party creatives to produce content for the Dungeons and Dragons gaming system. Um, I have not really ever played Pathfinder. I have read a lot about Pathfinder. I've watched a lot of videos about Pathfinder. Um, I think at one time, even Critical Role was using Pathfinder as its gaming system, but then it moved to Dungeons and Dragons. And I believe that was shortly after Stranger Things got popularity in the D&D culture. But anyway, yes, Dungeons and Dragons, first and foremost, Dungeons and Dragons is a culture. It has always been a lifestyle. Much in the same way as Hasbro has pointed out or used as illustration, Harley Davidson is not just a motorcycle company or a product, but as well is a lifestyle, right down to having clothing and dishware and everything else that goes with it. There is even some music that is associated directly with the Harley Davidson ecosystem. Ecosystems are something else that was talked about by Dungeon Craft. Professor Dungeon Master is the character there. And he used the Apple ecosystem as an example of what Hasbro is trying to create with One D&D, and has always wanted to tap into that captive audience kind of mode, is what I would call it. Uh, I mean, I have no problem with a company wanting to pursue some kind of stability with their product or with their intellectual properties. Um, Locking it down to the point where third-party creators don't get a chance to do any kind of inputs or contributions. I don't know. I have conflicting opinions about such things. Namely, in the idea that I am myself a creator, a maker. I do artwork, I do sculptures, and yes, I do paint miniatures for a profit for other people, but I do not ever claim to be affiliated with any of the miniatures companies whose minis I paint for other customers. And it's a painting service no different than if I was a house painter or somebody who was going to do a mural for a study or something, or for a business sign maker. And I did work as a sign maker for a while, so we understand this. Do we still have to abide by all the different little wrinkles and foibles that come with copyright and stuff like that? Yeah, of course we do. Um, but if somebody wants me to paint their Space Marines in the color schemes of Ultramar, then I'm going to paint them in the color schemes of Ultramar, and I will charge accordingly. Which, by the way, I'm pretty fucking cheap compared to what most people are going to be charging. But I'm not showing off Golden Demon or Silver Brush or Crystal Brush, excuse me, levels. I'm talking about this is, get it on the table, make it look nice, um, and save you some time so you can play more. But that's the other thing too, is I try to go as fast as possible. Yeah, segue. I digress. So, Nerd Immersion went on and on and on about how the OGL, the Open Gaming License, had been a mainstay of the Dungeons and Dragons ecosystem, to use Professor Dungeon Master's word, for a very, very long time, all the way back to third edition in 3.5, which he points out that if it had not been for the OGL, that when fourth edition happened, we would not have gotten Pathfinder. Because Pathfinder borrows very, very heavily from the D&D system. Now, there are a few other content creators in this hobby sphere that have talked about how, Dungeons & Dragons isn't expected to do everything. D&D does not support a sci-fi environment, in spite of the fact that it has things like Battleforge, which are basically robots, and the like. And there's also spell-jamming adventures in space, which they don't even have a space combat system for. Which I believe the first edition under TSR did. So I don't know why they didn't put one into fifth edition. Maybe they figured that GMs would just homebrew it at the table, or maybe they're saving it for subscription content behind that paywall, which is going to be the one D&D experience. But yeah, he spends a good, oh shoot, how long is this video? He spends a good 38 minutes or so just going on and on and on about how it's kind of shady and it's kind of, predatory and all that other fun stuff. He talks a lot about the non-disclosure agreements that content creators are being asked to sign if they're, in exchange for being given the no about what the future of the OGL is going to be or what the future of 1D&D and D&D Beyond will do in relationship to their contributions. And like I said, as a player of games, not necessarily a Dungeons and Dragons player, if I was going to break down my hobby sphere in terms of influence, D&D and RPGs were the first things that I got into as far as hobby gaming was concerned. I had always bought those little historical miniatures, the really flimsy plastic ones that were just a brutal shit to paint with, and at the time I only had access to Tester's enamel paints, so you can imagine that nightmare. I had also not been very versed in priming. I always thought priming was something that my dad did for his wood model kits. And yes, model kit building would be my very first hobby, where I would be... I'm supposed to belch at somebody eventually, I think, right? Here we go. There's the cheese. Bitter goat cheese. I've had bitter goat cheese recently. It's actually not as bad as it sounds. It's very delicious. But yeah, I would say balsa and plastic model kit building was something that I got introduced first as my hobby sphere. But as far as hobby gaming is concerned, Dungeons & Dragons was my intro. I very quickly went on to other RPGs as they came out. And then I got introduced to Warhammer 40,000, which came to me under the auspices of being an RPG with a miniatures combat system attached to it. Now, I'd always been aware that Chainmail was the forerunner to D&D, and I knew that Dungeons & Dragons was really just a miniature battles game with an RPG system laid over the top of it. And I had no problem getting it. I got into Warhammer 40K pretty quickly, and then shortly after that, and came to Gunpla, which is not necessarily hobby gaming, but is a return to my original, hobby sphere of model making. And through Gunpla and kit bashing with Warhammer 40K, because at the time they didn't have all the tanks and things that they do now, we basically did really build a lot of our own stuff. And the rulebook, the Rogue Trader rulebook, first edition, 40K, if you will, encouraged that kind of creativity. And this is, I'm bringing 40K up into this because it is a parallel to what's happening with Dungeons and Dragons right now. D&D has always been a very encouraging environment in that, you were told rather specifically in the rule books, the first few editions of the rules, that if there's a rule or a situation in the game that doesn't get covered by the book, make it up. And if there's something in the book that doesn't jive with what your gaming group is doing, don't use it, or change it, or make it up. You were given free and open license and encouragement to just make the game your own any way you so chose. And the only time you ever had to worry about so-called official rules is when there were competitions at conventions, which in my head, I've never actually been a part of one, never actually seen one played out, and I've been trying to figure out, how do you compete in a game that is basically cooperative? Which group finishes the dungeon first? Do you all start at the same time? Or how far do you get with, experience points, killing as many monsters as possible and getting as much gold pieces as possible? Because when, at the time that I was playing D&D and I started hearing about, convention-based competitions, you got 1 XP for 1 gold piece. It was still a gold piece driven economy as far as experience points was concerned. But anyway, again, that's going off on a tangent. So Warhammer 40K didn't have a lot of models at the time. They didn't have all the Forge World and everything else that we have access to now, and definitely not 3D printing. So everything was scratch built and kit bashed. And I came into playing Gunpla because just as I came into 40K, because my brother and I played, Dungeons and Dragons and other RPGs, I came into Gunpla or Mobile Suit Gundam model plastic kits by way of looking for kit bashing materials to make tanks and jet bikes and other things and terrain for my Warhammer 40K games. And from that, I got interested in science fiction RPGs and, used Gunpla as stand-ins for, my giant robot adventures in Robotech, the Macross role-playing game by Palladium Books. But anyway, the point being is that,
welcome back.
And because of my continued Dungeons and Dragons and hobby gaming interests, I got into Magic the Gathering. Now, Magic the Gathering was totally different than Dungeons and Dragons in that you played with set playing pieces, and while there were homebrewers at the table, guys would show up with proxy cards of their own fan creations, and we were totally cool with, as long as it didn't look like it broke the game in any way, we would allow that to happen. We would do that. But Magic the Gathering, while it started off as just a collectible trading card game, which was pretty new at the time, quickly evolved into a tournament-based competitive, community. And so having official playing pieces became a big thing. Now, this laying alongside or being adjacent to, Magic the Warhammer 40K, gradually becoming more standardized and more tournament-driven. Even though 40K was never meant to be a competitive game. It's like trying to say that 40K was kind of like taking. I don't know. I mean, I think it's just natural in human beings to have any kind of competition. I was trying to find a game that's very clearly not competitive, but people can just find any reason to compete with anything. So yeah, 40K is just not really made to be a competitive game. The rules for 40K really were, like I said, rooted in an RPG kind of system. I forgot to do this. And then, eventually and gradually that RPG element got, standardized and codified, and army books came out, and, then you've got, now you've got this competitive scene that 40K is now predominantly competitive, but balance issues still say that the game is not designed to be a tournament game. Whereas other games that you could find, very easily lend themselves to tournaments, like Star Wars Miniature Battles or Star Wars Battles from Hasbro. Actually, it was at the Coast at the time. But anyway, so how do I actually feel about the open gaming license being locked down, and that third-party creators are basically going to be freelancers for D&D Beyond and all that? I don't really care. Ultimately, just like, I got lost. Just like, with Warhammer 40,000, I still play the game, but I play with rules that I made up or that I've modified, because I don't play competitively anymore. I play with, family and friends, or I play against myself. So it's like, I can just go ahead and, say whatever happens, and what the fuck, it's not going to make much of a difference. And if my friend wants to bring 3,000 points more than I do, and I can still whop his ass with my, elite orcs, then that happens. Because the dice are that, that's the thing, is that you can't make a competitive game that is so driven by dice, and that's why like I said, I always get kind of confused when people have D&D competitions at conventions. How can you do that apart from just solving the puzzle of the dungeon? Because you have all this randomness in the game. There's no randomness in chess, so chess is perfectly aligned to competition. Do people make third-party content for chess? Well, yeah, there's tons of people out there who make custom chess boards and chess playing pieces. There's even a few companies that have offered, little peripherals to be played along with chess. There's a deck of chess cards out there that I ran across once a long time ago, where you could every time you move the playing piece other than a pawn, or you at the start of each turn. I'm gonna fail this. My gosh, what the hell is that all about? Goofy ass shit. then certain environmental conditions can come up. Like your knight can actually now if you're playing your knight this turn, he makes this specific move. If you're playing your pawn, I said that pawns don't get these cards. But I'm using a pawn as an example. So instead of a pawn just being able to move once, you can move two pawns, or you can move one pawn to move squares. It added a randomness to it, but it obviously would not make it very competitive in that sense. But it was fun. It was kind of fun. And I don't see anybody with a monopoly on the game of chess, coming after people and forcing them to pay royalties or a licensing fee to make custom chess pieces. I mean, if I wanted to make custom chess pieces out of Warhammer 40k figures and sell it on Etsy, I don't think that GW would come after me for doing so, because I'm not actually doing anything with their IP outside of just picking models to create a chess theme in them. And that's been done also. GW actually has a chessboard license out there. So I don't know. I think I think anytime a company locks down their IP like this, is showing concern that maybe they feel that they're not going to be able to hold the market together. And in light of all the other independent games that have come out, or small box games that have come out, things like Five Torches Deep is still running on the D&D style D20 system, but it's like it is significantly different enough that it is not treading over anything D&D. My only concern about Hasbro doing what they're doing is trying to set a precedent so that nobody else can enter the economy or the environment, and that kind of exclusionism is very wrong. It's bad for growth. It's bad for entrepreneurship. It's bad for developing the culture. It's bad for everything. It causes stagnation. And while staying the course might be something of a political platform that brings a lot of comfort and stability to people, too much of that will it'll turn you into a mono tasker, and organisms of all kinds, even economic organisms, things like Disney or Nintendo and Microsoft and Hasbro. If they over specialize too much, or if they cause stagnation in the evolution of the product or the service, that staleness, it kills it. It makes it go away. There's a strong reason why, certain things that we used to think were going to be common day 100 years ago don't even exist anymore. It's because they weren't able to adapt. They weren't able to evolve, and so they got left behind by better tools and better ideas. And my only concern is that, if Hasbro isolates the D&D culture as much as it wants to, that people will just stop playing D&D. Many people will still play D&D. There will always be enough people to play D&D to keep the product out there and keep the community going. But Dungeons and Dragons is not the community of role-playing gamers or tabletop gamers. Dungeons and Dragons is no more the center or the driving force behind tabletop gaming as poker or craps is to gambling, or that Monopoly and Clue is, or anything else out there. I mean, can you say that chess is the center of tabletop gaming? Not really. Can you say that Chutes and Ladders is the center of board gaming? No, you can't. Can you say that soccer is the core of sports? That all of the sports, derive their play styles from soccer? No, not even close. So Hasbro trying to bulwark their IP, and so that everybody or anybody who makes an RPG has to pay them something for it, that's not something that's going to be happening. Fortunately, copyright and patent laws exist as such across the globe that the idea of role-playing games cannot be patented and locked down on its own. Just like Wizard of the Coast tried to do this with Magic the Gathering, tried to claim that any other trading card game that ever came out is basically infringing upon the copyrights of Magic the Gathering systems. And while games like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh were very clear copies of Magic the Gathering, proving that in a court of law in those international markets was just impossible. Um, and truth be told, that role-playing games existed long before Dungeons and Dragons chainmail or even historical gaming tables were around. You know, Role-playing games existed as early back as the first time two or more people got up on stage and pretended to be somebody else, if you want to get technical about it. So can you put a patent on theater design or crafting, theater craft? No, you can't. um, yeah, that's kind of just my ramblings right there about the hobby state. Anyway, thanks for stopping by. The hashtag is what is it? I put it in my actual description here, so let me go find that, please. I'm so clumsy when it comes to this. It doesn't matter. Excuse me, no, it does matter, but I mean, it's like, yeah, it's D and it's open D&D is what it's called, is the hashtag. So if you want to go look it up and go find the video, watch it, then yeah,
I see that.
I guess you could
I
have
am
some
on
fun
my
with
new
that.
life herald.
Anyway, thanks for stopping by.
Otherwise, I run a lumber mill.